friends, this is Trish and welcome to Teacher Therapy. Today we have an amazing guest, Dr. Debra Em Wilson. She is absolutely incredible. She's the author of The Polyvagal Path to Joyful Learning, The Polyvagal Backpack. She's a reading specialist, a neurodevelopmental specialist, and the founder of the program School Moves. So I'm so honored to have you here. How are you doing today, Debra?
Oh, thanks, Trish. I'm really glad to be here. I've been watching your videos and following you and reading the chats.
Well, I have heard that you have quite the story. You have a long career in education, but today we're just going to be focusing on stress and burnout and healing and so many things. But you have a story of a super stressful day. And just for fun, I thought you could tell our audience about that day.
Well, I had been working with some ninth graders. It's part of my master's program in reading. I got a master's in clinical reading, and as part of my master's project, I took these 12 students who are reading at about first through third grade level, and I worked with them for 8 weeks, and 8 to 12 weeks, actually it was more like 12 weeks, and we had just done such a good job, and the students were with me, and they were typical students that weren't really engaged in what we were doing, but they had done such a good job. The principal decided that they should take their standardized testing with me in my room, and so we all settled in, and it was a week long. Finally, Friday came and we finished up a little bit early, and I asked the students, what do you want to do? And they said, let's make paper airplanes. And I'm thinking, great, what harm could come of that? And nobody ever visited where I was because I was out on this, like, I call it Green Acres, this little portable where nobody ever comes. They just are happy that the students aren't in these other classrooms creating a lot of trouble for the teachers, right? They're just, let her do her thing out there. And little did I know, the principal had been talking to the person of power, I'll just call it the person of power in our district, and saying, you know, what a good job I was doing with these students. So as the students are making the paper airplanes, this person walks up the ramp, opens the door, and literally a paper airplane flies right by his ear. And I look over and I'm thinking, who is this person? I hardly ever see this person, and realized who it was. He flew off the handle, looked at me, didn't gather any information, and just said, you're fired. You'll never work another day ever. You'll never see another classroom. And of course, my nervous system's going, what the heck? And all my students are a bit in shock. And he stood there and continued to yell at me. It wasn't just like a one-time deal. So he's yelling at me. I'm trying to maintain some type of composure in front of my students. And finally he leaves. I just start to cry. You know, this traumatic event happens. And I dismiss the students. So they just kind of crawl out of the classroom. My principal hears about this. I guess this person of power goes back to his office and says, you are firing her today. Now she's done. So the principal comes in, sits down with me, and he's always been really supportive, which is what I hear in your channel a lot, right? Is that how important that support is and feeling safe and having safety. So he was my safety net. He knew I'd been going kind of beyond for these students. And we sat down together, and he assured me I wouldn't be fired, that he'd smooth it over. But it was just it was an event that really left me, you know, it was some trauma. I wish I got trauma all the time, schools, but teachers are traumatized as much as students are with these events. So we ended up, it was fine. And the funniest thing is that I ended up getting teacher of the year because the principal made me teacher of the year. And so this person of power had to hand me my certificate I didn't put this in the book, but at the award ceremony, he actually had to hand me the certificate and shake my hand.
Wow.
And I don't think he was too thrilled to do that.
Wow. Now that is a stressful story. I don't think most teachers can say that they were fired publicly in front of their students. So that is intense. And that can kind of lead us into the conversation of what kind of stress are you seeing amongst teachers, because you go around and do professional developments, and I'm sure you kind of hear conversations. So what are some of the talking points that teachers are really frustrated about?
Well, I don't think it's anything that your audience doesn't already know. It's pretty much that lack of support. I know sometimes there's really great administration, But a lot of times when I'm doing professional development, the administrators aren't anywhere in the room. We're just working with I'm working with the teachers and the support staff. And so if they're not in the room and joining us, they don't understand some of the activities or strategies I'm talking about and that we've agreed to pilot as a group. And so that leads, that leads to some stress. And of course, it's time, so much to cover, not enough time. That's another reason why I wrote this book on polyvagal, because one of the big polyvagal concepts is the magic happens in moments. So we may not have tons of time, but the small little micro connections, the small little moments make a difference. And even when I'm doing a workshop, I try to connect with everybody I'm with, and even the ones like this that are, they are just because they have to be. I try to sit with them when I have a break or at lunch or whatever. I try to connect and say, I understand, I hear you, I know there's frustration. One time I had to do professional development. I was the third one. They hadn't had one. Whole new curriculum on Monday, something about trauma-informed on Tuesday, another thing on Wednesday. By the time they got to me, they were just done. They were really shut down. And so a big part is just acknowledging that. Like, why would we do 4 professional developments in 1 week for our staff?
Absolutely. And that kind of brings us to the topic of everything you do, which is focused on polyvagal theory and the nervous system. And I think most of us have heard terms like fight, flight, freeze, but polyvagal theory goes way deeper. So can you kind of get us started with understanding our nervous system and why it's so important as teachers?
Sure. Let's check in. Everybody who's watching, anybody who's watching right now, I want you to check in with yourself, and I want you to just put your one hand on your heart and the other hand on your stomach, and just kind of take a deep breath if you can, or just feel, are you energized right now, and is it disorganized and kind of a little frantic and unfocused? Or are you just like meh, like I've had it with this, I've had it with education, ready to, I don't care. Or you don't have enough money to leave, so you have to stay. So you're just kind of shut down. You're just like, okay, I'm just here. I'll do my job. I'll do what I need to do. But I don't really feel like what I do matters. I don't feel like it's helping. Or are you feeling like, oh, this is interesting. I'm leaning in. I'm feeling not really at all stressed or activated. Okay, so those are the 3 states. So not activated is a fancy term. I have my graphics here because, I'm a teacher. So this is ventral vagal. And think of it as the nervous system. You've got a heart and a vent. You can think of it, it's a heart place. It's where you feel connected to others. You feel safe. You feel like you've got your backpack on, your students do, and everybody's ready to learn. You've got all the support you need, and you feel pretty darn good. Doesn't mean you're blissful and mindful and doing meditation. It just means things are going to come at me through the day, but I'm feeling like I can handle it. I'm feeling like I call it keeping one foot in ventral. Students are kind of grabbing the other foot, trying to pull you into the muck, but you've got one foot on your green, lush ventral path. I kind of think of it that way, right? Then if you're activated and you start to feel unsafe, and your nervous system always through it's a fancy term called neuroception, looking for signs of danger. And in our classrooms today, there's a lot of signals of dangers that we're getting, not only our students. And when I wrote the book, I wanted to focus on us. Not students are in book 2 where I talk about the polyvagal backpack. Book 1, it's all about us and why we're feeling how we're feeling in classrooms. So I think of sympathetic like this. You have a shield and you're either in fight or flight. And in sympathetic, and people say, why is it called sympathetic when you're not sympathetic? You can't be sympathetic in sympathetic. Your nervous system is being sympathetic to your plight, and to defend you and to keep you safe, it's going to activate a fight or flight response, right? More blood flow, increased attention to whatever you're doing, feeling energized, mobilized. Sometimes it's a little bit disorganized. Think about like if you're really frustrated or getting anxious, what do you do? Some people go and clean the house, right? What do you do, Trish, when you're feeling really amped up and you have that energy? What do you do there?
I kind of pace around.
Yeah, when I talk on the phone, sometimes I'm pacing. So that's your nervous system's way of saying, I need to organize this mobilization. I need to do something. And so that's typical fight or flight. We all know fight or flight. right? But the new thing with polyvagal is that freeze is actually a second branch. Poly means many, right? And vagal, the vagus nerve. So it's actually a second branch. So you have your ventral vagal branch, but you also have your dorsal vagal. So if sympathetic doesn't get you out of danger and getting you back to connection and safety, then your body may assume that this is way too dangerous. I'm just shutting you down altogether. So that it can go into like a freeze state. It can also go into just shut down. Freeze is kind of a response of, it can be in the classroom, of too much information is coming toward a student. They don't know what to do with it. Say they have processing difficulties. They don't know how to respond, so they temporarily need things to stop so they can figure out where's all this information coming in, and do I want to go sympathetic, or do I need to shut down? It's that momentary freeze. So that's the new science with the polyvagal, is that new branch, and it explains how if we're in extreme danger, sometimes we can shut down altogether, we don't even remember it, or we can't fight back because we're frozen. So that's dorsal vagal. And I think in a way to remember that for all of you on the call is just basically, it's a door and you're shutting the door to the world. You're just saying, I'm done. I can't take any more of this. I just want to stay in bed with the covers over my head. But you can't, because you have to get up and go to school. That's dorsal vagal. So those are the three states: ventral vagal, where you're not activated; sympathetic, fight or flight, which most people know; and then dorsal vagal, shut down altogether. And for the students, I often use like V for ventral sign language, S for sympathetic sign language, and this is sign language for shutdown. As my daughter is an adult, she's 27, and she's non-speaking. She can understand. I've taught her to read. She can text me, but we use some sign.
Okay, I'm going to see if I understand. So would you say that ventral is the good place, the place that you generally want to be? Is that how that works?
It is. However, that's a lot of pressure on ourselves. Like what I'm seeing and hearing a lot at workshops is, if we're not perfectly calm, our students won't be perfectly calm. And if we're not perfectly calm, then we can actually create this. We have a sympathetic response, we can create that in our students. And so that puts a lot of pressure on us, because we all move through states throughout the day. And the key is to observe it, be able to name it and say, oh, and like Deb Dana uses a ladder analogy. So if we're moving down our ladder, we're in ventral, at the top of our ladder, we can see options, we can see possibilities. And as we move down into sympathetic, we're in fight or flight. It's to start to notice, I'm getting into fight or flight. My students, I'm seeing my students in fight or flight, or this particular student. And then am I going, even if that doesn't keep us safe, we go even further down into dorsal vagal shutdown. And I think right now, education, just let's talk about, where do you think between ventral vagal, sympathetic, and dorsal vagal, and this will be a nice summary for you to see if you're getting it. Where do you think we are in education right now? What nervous system state is the collective state of education today?
It's so funny you should mention that, because as you were explaining dorsal, I was like, that's what happened to me when I quit in April of 2021. I was so burnt out. I couldn't muster up my happy, cheery face. I couldn't muster the energy. And it really scared me, because I'm kind of a peppy go-getter. I'm like, drink 19 cups of coffee and get the job done. But a combination of all the stress and trauma going on in my personal life, and the year and a half of pandemic teaching and tons of different changes, that were going on in the school, all of that combined. And I think I completely shut down. And I think a lot of, the education field, they're in the dorsal state and they're just kind of done. And it's almost, to me, it sounds a bit like a depression. And I think that that's what is kind of settling over a lot of education. There's hopelessness, there's cynicism, there's frustration, but it's gotten to the point, I think, where people are like, I don't even think that I'm making a difference. That probably sounded dismal, but does that sound about right?
That is exactly right. That is where we are, because we were in fight for a while. Like, we know what's good for kids. And if you listen to us, we can do what's good for kids. And so I think there was a point where we were fighting for students and fighting for ourselves. And the fight became school boards and parents and all of this division. And then we just said that didn't get us safe. That didn't reconnect us with our parents, our administrators, our students. So yeah, dorsal vagal is the next place we go. That's exactly where you are. And that is a scary place. What we know is that to get out of dorsal vagal, it takes that some gentle movement, like a gentle walking, some kind of movement or activation. That's what school moves is all about, is, in sympathetic, we need a little bit bigger movement. like wall push-ups, from the occupational therapy field, some heavy work. But that's why, the biophilic sciences right now are all about nature and how important it is to, even if you have a poster in the room of a tree that you can just look at when you're starting to go down there, something that's beautiful. And I think the main reason you don't write books in education to get famous or rich, because you don't. You write them because you feel like there's something important here. And so I wrote this because I felt like it's something important to say, was that we are in a state of hopelessness and dorsal vagal shutdown. So how do we move ourselves up back in the field of education? How do we get back into ventral, where when we view the world from ventral, there's hopefulness, there's possibility. We can see how we can change and transform. But we can't do that from sympathetic. Everybody's your enemy in sympathetic. And from dorsal vagal, it's nobody cares. Our view is from dorsal vagal is nobody really cares about us. Why bother? Why try?
Wow. That's really interesting. And in the book, you talk about the importance of safety and connection. And I was kind of pondering on that, like, in what ways did I not feel safe and connected? And we've kind of talked about across the channel, there's a lack of a feeling of safety because it feels like a gotcha culture in a lot of schools because there's constant observation and constant data checks. And it feels like in the meetings we're being berated, and people that kind of come out and share what they're really thinking, it feels like there's a cosmic fly swatter that comes down and whacks us. So there's not that feeling of safety. And then same thing with connection. Sometimes there's questions about coworkers, because I think a lot of us have had experiences where we really did open up to a coworker and we felt heard and seen. And then they went and told our secrets to the principal. And then on top of that, there's a lot of the issues just kind of with students and their respect, for teachers. A lot of times it feels like an adversarial relationship. And so I think so many of us are just a little bit worried, like, is it possible to recover? And have you been in schools where it just seemed like they had a really healthy culture and the teachers were happy, or are you seeing less and less of that as you travel around?
Well, I haven't done on-site trainings right now since the pandemic. And I'm also getting older. The travel is pretty hard now. So I do a lot of online training with small teams. And a lot of the teams I'm working with are support staff. They're the behavior specialists, the occupational therapists, physical therapists, speech and language. And then there's usually teams like a kindergarten, the lead in kindergarten, first, second, third. Sometimes the principal joins, sometimes not. And because it's such a small group, I can really tap into where are you? And what are you seeing, and what your voice on this channel is. I mean, if we had to say mean, median, or mode, I think it's the mode right now. And I know that there's places I have watched some videos of some teachers that have a great relationship with their staff, and they have a great school culture. And what I'm hearing is that it does really start with the administration. So if administrators are watching this, it's so important. We always put the lens and the framework and the support on the student. How are the students doing? Are we talking in a trauma-informed way? Are we being trauma sensitive? And you have to use that lens with us as teachers. I had a teacher say to me, she had been so compassionate. You cannot be compassionate unless you're in ventral. Let's say that again. You cannot be compassionate unless you're in ventral. So if we have a whole education system in sympathetic and dorsal vagal shutdown, there's not going to be a whole lot of this compassion that we're all supposed to have. So I had a teacher a friend of mine, and she said she'd worked so hard with the student and been really compassionate, and he threw the chair across the room, that typical, got mad, threw the chair, that typical experience we hear about when kids go into sympathetic fight. That's one of the responses, right? Throw the chair. She went to the principal and said, I'm not feeling safe in the room, and the students aren't feeling safe either with this student. And this true story, the principal said, you just need to be more compassionate. That teacher needed at that time to be heard, seen, valued, and respected. This is an excellent teacher. She'd been teaching for 25 years. She wasn't making it up as she went along with management. She really knew how to take care of a class, and she was beloved by her students. But this one student was creating so much difficulty for everybody So she goes back to class. And here's the thing I want people to understand. The way we retune our nervous systems when we've had trauma in our childhood and even as adults is through the reparative process. And in mental health, what they call this like ruptures and repair. So when something happens and your nervous system senses it as a traumatic event, if it is not repaired, it continues to fester. You cannot take care of your nervous system. You cannot befriend your nervous system if repairs aren't being made. And that's what I'm seeing, is that this constantly, we're in a classroom experiencing all of these ruptures. One book, I read a paragraph that said something like, well, if the student cusses you out 17 times, but by the end of the week it's down to 13, consider that a win.
Wow.
And this is it's a new book out there. So what's happening is relational neuroscience is over here. And we know the science of safety and connection. We know all of that. We know it's important to build relationships. But if we aren't the first ones who get the safety and connection and get the relationships, we cannot be expected to have it with our students.
Wow. That's like a light bulb for me, because when you're saying repair, I'm also hearing accountability. And that is, I think, what's really missing. Just thinking of student-teacher relationships, because like you said, I've had, instances where a student calls me a B word, and I've been to professional developments that talk about, embracing students' cultures and, understanding why they said what they said and what did you do wrong. And it seems like every excuse in the book is made for students, but there's no thought of how did that make the teacher feel to be called that? And what kind of accountability is there for the student to do anything to try to repair that relationship? And just the weird movement in education seems to put all the pressure and all the stress and all the responsibility and all the accountability on the teachers. And it kind of feels like students can do whatever they want. They can say what they want. And yeah, there's never that repair being made. And that's very much how I felt as a teacher. I just it's almost difficult to not become bitter and cynical when you feel like you're being treated so poorly by students, their parents, by administrators, by random people from the district that pop into your room and leave a mean note. It's just like teachers are getting beat up these days. And so what are some things that we could do, like for the teachers that are in that situation right now? Is there anything that they could do to help them get through the day or feel some of that repair?
I think we need to bring awareness. And so what I worked with Leanna Ray, who's a social worker. I met with her every week when I was trying to translate this language, this mental health heavy stuff into education, and keep it through the lens of, I'm a teacher and I want to teach. I went into teaching because I love teaching. Social work and therapy, mental health therapy, it's a whole different field, and it's a really needed field. However, that's not the field we went into. And when I met with her every week and our talking to one another, I realized how different our language is, how different our view is of things. And so what we did is we came up with this continuum, and I'm actually going to show it to you. So we came up with this continuum where you start over here with safety and connection. Like, this is such a teacher thing, isn't it?
I love it.
Get a pool noodle and your little marker board and make this thing. But I think it will really help people understand. So if we're in safety and connection over here, that's ventral vagal, right? So if we handle miss and mends, Trish, those are the little things. Like a student says, I don't know where we are, and you're reading a book and you just, okay, they interrupted, but you get back on the same page and they apologize for their outburst or whatever, and you go right along. We miss and mend all day long, where our student wanted to talk to you about something, the bell rang, you didn't have time, and you said, I'll catch you, at the end of the day. The student might feel a little miss, like, oh, the teacher didn't notice me, right? They happen all through the day, but you don't feel really in danger, right? You're still over here. You find little, we call them in polyvagal world, micro connections. You take those little moments to reconnect with the student and to, say, hey, I'm here, I see you, and all that good stuff, and they reconnect with you. So we're over here. We're not very far from safety and connection with miss and mends. But then we get into rupture and repairs. Rupture and repairs are, the chair's been thrown across the room. We're now getting, do you see, we're further away from this safety. Over here. Okay, we're getting further away. And what I see is miss and mends kind of tier one. If you're in a tiered intervention, tier one, all class, tier two, small groups, tier three, individuals, right? So ruptures and repairs would be For those students who are constantly creating challenges for everybody, they might need a small group where you call in your mental health professionals. This is not for us to handle every day. This is where we get worn out. If we're rupturing and trying to repair all day long, we will be exhausted from this. And this is where schools have to have, and they don't, their counselor, their mental health professional, social worker, whomever, their behavior specialist that comes on and says, Trish, I got this for you. How would that feel to have somebody actually say to you, I got this?
Amazing. Yeah, because in a lot of the new ones, it's all about the teacher's got to pull the kid outside of the room and have a 10-minute debrief while the kids are in the classroom, like throwing paper airplanes in a non-constructive way.
Right. So when I was writing this book, I said, this was my aha moment. We're handling way too much rupture and repair. And then also now we get into, I'm sorry, with this camera, it's really hard to know which way I'm going, right to left.
Perfect.
So breach and build. So breach and build is, when we have these very traumatic events for the whole community. Something has happened at that school, and now we need to call in law enforcement, and we call in all the services we have. It's very difficult. It's been a breach of trust. Right? We don't trust that we're going to ever be safe again. And that now, do you see, we're over here at danger and disconnection. So we keep moving further over here. And so that's what's happened in our schools. We've all gone into this danger and disconnection, and we've gone into protection. So we're in shutdown. And I think what's happening is we handle too much. Like, if there's anything I could recommend, it would be to really start thinking, when you're handling things every day, is this a miss and mend? Okay, wow, this is a rupture and repair. And keep track of it. How many ruptures happened in that day in your classroom? And I think the administration, if they can start, and I know for some nervous systems, a miss could be a ruptured feeling. I mean, it's not like it's clean cut and this is always a miss and mend, but you measure it by how unsafe you feel and how disconnected you feel from everybody else. And so if we can start looking at where's our support staff in tier 1, we don't need as much because we're handling miss and mends, but in the smaller groups, those students, 20% in our classroom, that every day you have all these other students who love learning or coming in or wanting to learn, and there's this disruption going on constantly. So that's rupture. How do we handle those? And then finally the breach and builds, hopefully we don't have, but we do. We're having those in our schools, and that's the violence. Breach and builds, we have to rebuild from the ground up with those.
It's interesting because I almost wonder, in a situation like I experienced when I worked in the private school, where the kids got together and made up career-ending rumors and spread them to all the parents and were making memes about me. I wonder if, in kind of a non-literal sense, for me, if that was almost like the breach type, because I just felt like I couldn't trust anybody. I felt so betrayed, and it was so difficult to stand in front of those kids every day knowing that they were looking for anything that I would say to twist it around and run and tell their parents. I wonder if that can ever be the case in that extreme, if we could feel that way, even if it's not like a life-threatening kind of danger.
Absolutely. That's a breach to your nervous system, and it was a traumatic event. And what happened is there was no repair. That's the key. You can have these traumatic events and we can maintain our ventral energy for teaching, but those repairs have to be done. And there wasn't repair, and you should have been supported. You weren't seen, heard, respected, supported.
Wow, this all makes so much sense. So I'm wondering, if a teacher is in one of these really difficult situations and they feel like they're leaving the ventral and they're going in one of the directions that's not a good one, is there anything they could do to kind of calm themselves down in the moment?
Science tells us just naming the state brings on frontal lobe activation. So that's really simple that we can do, right? I like to just do the heart. I call it heart to home in school. With this, we have this calming routine, but I don't calm constantly like everybody, let's calm. My teaching is very active. Like, if I put words on the boards and they're learning, and we're doing arrows and we're clapping and saying those words. So I'm constantly looking at that sympathetic mobilization in students and finding a healthy way for them to get that mobilization out. And so that's one of the key things, is to organize that disorganized energy. And I know some people are into breathing and some aren't. A shrug is just like it resets the nervous system like a deep breath. Because sometimes when you're activated, I know for me, deep breathing's hard. I'm so active, and I don't have a home away from home. And think about that. Where do you naturally go? Is it more of a sympathetic activation, or is it more of a shutdown? So I did a poll in the last webinar I did, and it was kind of interesting. I was like 56% were sympathetic and the other half were dorsal vagal shutdown. Is their natural place they go when they feel threatened. So heart to home, just take a shrug, quick shrug, and name your state. I am in sympathetic, or I'm moving into sympathetic, or I'm going into dorsal vagal shutdown. Just naming that can help. And then doing some kind of, with your class, I know teachers like, if I move, they're all going to get out of control. I mean, there's all these things around movement. But if you do something really simple, like one of the things that I do is just, patting on the desk and just doing like heel, pat, side, pat, heel, pat. It's a rhythm movement. Rhythm is what really helps the nervous system. And also just doing this. And I know you can't necessarily do that in front of students, but I would invite the students and say to the students, this is what the books are about, is like, first we understand this, then teach the students to I tell a story in the book where a student noticed I was having a really bad day and said, I think you need to do the calming routine, right? The student was able to observe that I was a little dysregulated. I'd been up all night with my kids the night before they were sick, and been out on the tarmac in the snow, morning duty. I was just kind of had it. So I think, naming it, being able to say it out loud, and this whole thing about we always have to stay calm. If we're threatened and we feel unsafe, we're going to be activated. So moving into sympathetic, but saying, whoa, I can feel myself being, moving into sympathetic. And even if you're saying it in your head, you start to feel those chemicals starting to flow, right? You start to feel your palms sweating. You're getting there. So making a list of, and we use a formula in Polyvagal World called IOB. I call it the IOB formula: inside, outside, and between. So inside yourself, what can you do? Heart to home, notice, name. Outside in the environment, what can you do? What do you have on your desk that's a beautiful picture of your children that brings you ventral energy? Or is it a picture of a trip you're going to be taking as soon as school's out? What is it that you can look at just visually? Is it, like I talked about, for a poster in your room, something that you can do in your environment that helps you feel safer and more connected to your ventral energy? And then between others, it's so important. When I looked at teacher happiness, when I was writing the book, I was like, so I'm reading all this research on why it's not working, but what makes teachers happy? Who are the happy teachers, and what's their world look like? And all the research was pointing to having that collaborative person, that trusting person. See, Trish, you didn't have that, right? That person that you knew you could meet with after school and discuss what went on. They had your back, they supported you. And that isn't always the case in schools these days, because we sometimes are pitted against each other with test scores, and we don't necessarily want to share what we're working on with somebody else, or because of all the competition that's developed. So if you think about IOB, what do I have inside myself? Who are those people in my life that I know I can count on, that live within me? They can be your parents or somebody who's passed away. I mean, it can be anybody inside of you too. Outside in the environment, what can I do? Even if it's where, like when I'm doing an interview, I wear a bright color like this because periwinkle and these kind of colors make me feel good when I put them on. So even grabbing the black sweater, if you're going to school not feeling very happy, put something on that makes you look at and go, oh, I like this top. And people say, oh, you look really nice in that today. So even doing those small things. And then definitely you have to find someone in your life, a relationship that you can sit down and say, here's what's going on with me, and how do you see it from your lens? And then make those decisions of whether you're going to stay or leave teaching or education from a ventral place, from a place of, okay, I'm looking at all options and possibilities. And after I've looked through all of these options and possibilities from ventral, this is the decision I'm going to make. And then you feel good about that decision, and you don't regret it.
Definitely. So I love to ask people, if you could wave a magic wand and change just one thing in education, even if it's completely unrealistic, what would you change in education right now?
Bringing it back to our conversation today, I would say that if we could all understand our nervous system states, befriend our nervous system, and keep one foot in ventral, so that we are always working with one another through respect, love, kindness, hope, possibility that we can figure this out. And that means everybody. That means our parents, the students, support staff, administration, teachers. That's how we create a kinder, more loving world. Is we are going to disagree on whatever we disagree on, but can we come to the table and discuss it like adults, right? And everybody kind of feels like they've been seen and they've been heard, and in some way find a happy medium. And I feel like right now teachers need support more than ever. And we have to shine that lens on us first as a profession, instead of just constantly looking at how can we make the world this perfect, loving, kind, beautiful place for students when we're not in that space. That's just asking the impossible of us as teachers.
I really appreciate your angle, and I appreciate somebody thinking about how teachers are doing, because I do think that that's been something that's been lost so much in the education conversation. It kind of reminds me a little bit of the giving tree story where teachers are just giving and giving until they literally have nothing to give. And so I also hope that, this becomes a movement. I hope that educators and schools and boards and superintendents get a hold of polyvagal theory and really think about how some of their policies are impacting teachers and students and families. So is there any final words of wisdom you want to leave us with today?
In book 2, I actually talk about something called the human giver syndrome. Mm-hmm. And that was brought up by, in this book, Burnout, The Secret to Unlocking the Stress Cycle. Yeah. And it's a really interesting book. We will go into education because we love our students, and generally we're kind of giver people, or you don't go into education, but we have to love ourselves first and really respect and appreciate and care for ourselves. And in this book, my favorite line is, the secret to burnout isn't self-care, it's all of us caring for one another. And I love that line.
That's beautiful and so true. Well, this has been so good. I'm so glad that you came on, and you're welcome back anytime. And everybody, again, this is Dr. Debra Em Wilson, author of The Polyvagal Path to Joyful Learning and The Polyvagal Backpack. So as for my viewers, we'll see you guys next time. Bye, everybody.